What are three reasons why Denver Broncos head coach Sean Payton can turn the team around instantly versus waiting a long period of time? We're going to dive deep into the traits that Sean Payton possesses. You'll get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, and a special shout out to all the everydayers out there who listen every single day, all year long. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss out on what's going on with the Denver Broncos as we build up toward training camp. We take a look at storylines not many people are talking about. You get all that action here on the show. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, I think a widely debated topic around national media surrounding when the Broncos hired Sean Payton really kind of surrounded with, can he turn Russell Wilson around? I don't think that's the valid question to be asking here. Now, obviously, I think that's going to be important, but Sayre, can Sean Payton turn the Denver Broncos around? I think is the bigger, the more important, the more long-term thing we all need to figure out whether or not that is the case. And look, I think there's some compelling areas of Sean Payton, his history and his makeup, his DNA as a coach that I think should give Broncos fans some confidence that, yeah, he can in fact do that. We're going to break down on today's episode of the show. So first off, let's dive into the first reason why we think Sean Payton can turn the Broncos around maybe this year. And I think when you look at it, Sayre, his history as a winning football coach, I mean, when you consider it, when you put it into perspective, he's got one of the top winning percentages all time in the NFL, and he has a chance to build on that even more here in Denver. He knows how to win, which the Broncos, they haven't known how to win since Peyton Manning.
That's right, and he does know how to win. I mean, he's not only top 23 all-time, tied with Curly Lambeau at 63.1 all-time in his winning percentage, but he's top 5 among active coaches. So let's just put this into perspective here for a bit. Over a 15-year sample with the New Orleans Saints, Sean Payton averaged 11 wins per 17 games. So you put that into perspective for this season for the Broncos. I mean, we're talking about a coach who has on average 11 wins every 17. So that would be what 11-6 record in today's NFL, which is pretty awesome. And you would love to have that if you're the Denver Broncos. That's a ticket to the playoffs, essentially, is what you're saying right there. Pretty much every year. And this is a head coach who, Cody, like I mentioned this before, and I think it's worth repeating. Getting Sean Payton was like getting Peyton Manning back in 2012. This has been completely, I think, under the radar. And I think there's remember back in 2012, the Broncos got Peyton Manning. It felt like the majority of the fan base was super excited because, well, the team had just won a playoff game and it looked like the defense was ascending and you had those young playmakers on offense. And now you add Peyton Manning to the mix. And even if you weren't optimistic about his neck and his health and things like that, I think the majority of people were at least like, all right, this is worth seeing what could happen here because it's Peyton Manning, right? I mean, but the context of the Broncos is so much different now with Sean Payton coming in that it feels like there's more skepticism and pessimism within the fan base with him on board, right? It's like, well, the Broncos have been so bad and Russell Wilson was terrible last season. It's like, let's wait and see. The expectations and the excitement have been a bit tempered, I would say, even though Sean Payton has had ridiculous success as an NFL head coach, which certainly isn't limited to his overall winning percentage.
Well, I think the other thing as well, and look, I get it. You search Twitter, you search YouTube, you search Reddit of all places as well. A lot of Broncos fans, they're scared to get burnt again, which I understand. I mean, Sayre, it's been a rough 7-8 year stretch. If you're a Broncos fan with optimism, you win the Super Bowl in 2015, you go to the parade, and you have, okay, hey, we have the formula here. The Broncos just need someone to manage a game at quarterback with the defense that they have. They'll go back to the Super Bowl. They'll win it again. That was really the theme after that Super Bowl 50 victory that they had. And the reality is the quarterback carousel that they have gone through simply, I think, burnt out a lot of fans. The amount of head coaches that they have gone through has certainly burnt out a lot of fans. But this isn't a first-time head coach. And this is a guy who has won before. He's won a Super Bowl. He's been consistently in the playoffs. They've been a game away from maybe making it back to the Super Bowl. I mean, you're a bad pass interference call away against the LA Rams from going to the Super Bowl that year and facing the New England Patriots. And I look at everything that Sean Payton has done. He's, as a coach, not only just a winning percentage, he has found ways, Sayre, to put his teams in position, even if they were decimated with some injuries. They were missing key players. That, to me, I think, is the ultimate sign of a good coach. And he's already instilled a level of discipline that we haven't seen in the Broncos, at least from a practice standpoint, the way they operate and just the mentality and the mindset of a team. They haven't had that in so long, Sayre. And Sean Payton, I think, deserves the benefit of the doubt. Now, it goes without saying, every single coach has their flaws. I think we can acknowledge that. I don't think there's any perfect coach in the NFL. There's always a gripe. There's always something they could always get, improve and get better on it. And coaches are very reflective on that. But ultimately, Sean Payton is a different wild card than what the Broncos have had. And that, I think, gives me optimism from watching this team and feeling like, okay, hey, this team, if they can get this right, they can be competitive. They can win games again, which to me, it's about winning games. And for Broncos fans, it's about winning games. It's not necessarily about going out and winning a Super Bowl here in Sean Payton's first year, though that would be great. I think everybody would take that option. But if Sean Payton can turn the Broncos back into a winner and have them gain that respect back, I think that's a great first step in the right direction.
So let's put some substance to that, right? Let's just say there's people out there that are still questioning, well, why should we believe that could happen? The Broncos have been so terrible, and even though Sean Payton's a great head coach, like he's going to have to come in, we're going to have to actually see this stuff happen over different eras of football, dating back to 2006 and even before that when he was an offensive coordinator for the New York Giants. So we're talking about roughly 20 years, almost 20 years of sample size here. I pulled some numbers, Cody, on the consistency with which Sean Payton's offense dominated. There was very little variance throughout the course of the last 18 years that he's been coaching. 3 of those as an offensive coordinator in New York, 15 as a head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Listen to some of these numbers here. Over the last 18 years, Cody, his average offensive ranking was 4.7. And that was with a huge outlier in 2021. Remember when the Saints had to utilize Taysom Hill for the majority of that season as their quarterback? The offense, in terms of yardage, ranked 28th in the NFL. If you take that one outlier out of the mix, his average offense ranking in the NFL among 32 teams was 3.2. So typically a top 3 offense from this guy in terms of yardage produced. In terms of points scored, you're looking at even more ridiculous stats. 3 times in 15 years as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, Sean Payton had offenses rank outside the top 10. There was only 4 times in total that his offense in terms of scoring was double digits in terms of where they ranked 10th or lower. Cody, the 2 of the 3 times that they ranked outside the top 10 was 11th and 12th. So it's not like he was like, had even a middling offense. His offensive production is consistent through the years, and you can attribute that to Drew Brees if you want to. You can attribute it to whatever, X, Y, Z. He did it in different eras of football. He did it with different quarterbacks. He did it with defenses being allowed to do certain things early on and then not allowed to do certain things later on. He did these things consistently through the years. He found ways to completely obliterate opposing defenses, even when they have all this film on him, right? It's like the thing with quarterbacks. It's like, well, once they get the film on this guy, they're going to figure it out. Sean Payton is 10 steps ahead of everybody in terms of offensive game planning and scheming, and he's at the cutting edge of innovation in terms of doing what defenses can't defend against. He's been consistently great in this regard, and that's why I think you can have substantial optimism in the Broncos this coming season.
Payton's history as a winning coach is super important. Probably the most pivotal cherry on top we can discuss here as pertains to maybe the Broncos turning things around here in his first season. But his ability to teach the game is super, super important. We'll dive deeper into that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook, and baseball season is in full swing, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers, they get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. to join today. In terms of Denver Broncos futures, they currently have the 12th best odds right now over there at FanDuel Sportsbook of winning the AFC at plus 4,000 odds. There's a multitude of teams ranked above them, and depending on Sean Payton being an X factor here, could those increase as the season treks along? If the Broncos start showing some promise, will they jump up a little bit? It'll be interesting to see, and you can follow all the action at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Once again, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League.
To be a great coach in the NFL, you've got to be, in my opinion, Cody, and I think you would agree with me, a great teacher. And really, you know this as a coach. I know this as somebody who has managed teams throughout the course of my adult life, my professional career as well. It's essential to be a good teacher. Why? You have to be able to cast compelling vision. And Cody, we've heard that word over and over again this offseason, haven't we? From Sean Payton and from others on his staff, and even some of the players just talking about the vision that the coaches have for them, the vision that they have for the team, the vision that you set before you. Cody, talk about the importance of having vision and being a good teacher as a coach and why that stuff matters, because it's one thing to know football. It's completely different to be able to be an effective coach over 20 years time and then some, on top of that. So why is it so important that Sean Payton is a great teacher, not just a great coach?
Well, I think he understands. And look, I think any good coach understands this. Often at times, you look at the coaching world, and some of you look, if you have kids and they're playing Pop Warner, you have kids that play in high school or middle school, whatever it may be, or if you have kids that play in a college program, you're listening to the show right now. You look at it, and I think one thing you're always looking for as a parent and a coach is this, it also depends on your motivation as a parent. But, in terms of it is, can you teach the game, right? It's not about what coaches know. It's about what can they teach, right? Because I could know a lot of things. And, the kids that I'm coaching, let's say I know this about defense. I know this about leverage. But if I can't teach it to the players that I'm coaching, they'll never be effective. They can't carry out the vision in which I want. So that's where you really have to go back to being a great teacher. And look, I also think it starts with understanding, how do my guys learn the most effective, right? When I coach, I had some players who were more hands-on. You had to physically demonstrate it. You had to show them, walk them through it, which is great because you're a visual learner. There are also some people out there that maybe, you can see it drawing on a chalkboard or on a dry erase board. You draw the X's and O's. You can draw and showcase that. It's just all about learning style. And I will tell you this about Sean Payton in terms of talking to some, coaches and seeing Sean Payton firsthand. I think he understands as a coach, as the head coach, he does a great job of educating and teaching his coaches, right? Because these guys are all in the NFL. Like, the amount of work they've had to go through from working their way up, for the most part, a lot of these guys, coaching at the college level, becoming graduate assistants at first, working their way up until they got to the NFL in a position capacity. It's still about learning. And as the game changes, you have to continue to evolve. And I think Sean Payton has done such a tremendous job, Sayre, at being able to teach that to his coaches. And so his coaches go back and they know how to teach. Like, I was talking to Christian Parker last week after one of the press conferences when we had all the coordinators we were able to speak to. And Christian Parker said one thing about maybe his coaching style, the way he does. He's so smart. You can tell how detailed he is. But there's also ways, he even said it, like, I can teach certain ways, but, having guys like Justin Simmons, Kareem Jackson, when I talk to these guys, I talk to them as a coach and I can convey it a certain way. But players, these guys can convey it in a different way that maybe helps a younger guy understand that. The same thing goes with Sean Payton as a head coach. It's not about what you know. It's about what you can teach. And it all starts with Sean Payton teaching his coaches the way that he wants things done. And those guys echoing that and putting their own blend on it. That ultimately, you go back to the word vision, ties into the team vision. So I think we have to expand from there, Sayre. What is the team vision, right? To win football games, to be competitive, to be more disciplined. At the end of the day, everyone's like, oh, you just got to win games. What goes into winning, though? What are the things that make it possible to win? And it's not just, okay, hey, having a better offense. It's making sure you have a disciplined defense. It's having good special teams play. But then there's other branches that extend from that. How do you have a good defense? How do you have a good offense? How do you make sure you're disciplined and you can be effective on special teams? These are the levels that Sean Payton goes to teach not only the coaches, but the players. And it helps set the standard for what the organization hopes to become. And could they win some games this year? Could they turn it around? Yeah. But it's also at the same time, Sean Payton knowing, hey, This may take some time, but we have a vision. It's not just, hey, 1 year, we have a 1 year vision. We have a vision this year to hopefully get us to where we want to be 2 to 3 years down the road.
Right, exactly. And I would be shocked, Cody. I would be shocked, absolutely shocked if Sean Payton didn't have people in his life who are pouring into him in terms of his leadership traits, because he's obviously a very good leader. He's obviously somebody who understands leadership principles, concepts, disciplines. And really, you could get super deep about this kind of stuff, right? Because it is about football at the end of the day. This is a football team, but it's also a multi-billion-dollar organization where, like Vance Joseph said in his press conference, this is a business of winning. And if you don't win, change is going to happen. And so that is your ultimate goal. And I can't help but think of, I read this book, and maybe some of you listening have read this. Cody, maybe you've read this book. It's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the first couple of habits is begin with the end in mind, right? You've got to have a plan. And I think that Sean Payton really, he sets a great example of starting with the end in mind, right? You're not trying to force your way to the end, but we've seen the players wearing the uncommon t-shirts and just understanding that winning is uncommon in the NFL. It's not common to be one of the best teams in the league. You have to really strive to achieve that. And so starting with the end in mind, understanding this is where we're going, but this is how we're going to get there. And I can show you the way to get there, and I can tell you the right ways to get there because I've been there. And that's the value of having a Super Bowl champion head coach, right? And that's not to say that no first-year head coach could ever lead a team well. They can, absolutely. That's definitely, it's not off the table. But having somebody like Sean Payton with experience, somebody who knows the ins and outs of a team, who preaches the fine details, right? And it goes from everything to, remember when there was a story of him changing up the locker room in New Orleans and having a renovation done there and different things with like the sound inside the locker room for after games. So it's like he understands how much all of these little details play over the course of time, which is another leadership thing, the compound effect. You understand, you put in that daily work, you make those incremental changes day after day, you're going to see a huge difference over time. And so that's what he has to do now with the Denver Broncos. Implement those little changes day after day after day. Keep work first, right? Play second. Remember, there was no field day at OTAs. Work first, keep the end goal in mind, and create those daily habits that's going to compound over time so that you can be an uncommon team in the NFL in 2023.
And keep ascending it. That's what he wants his guys to do. And it's a process. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that it's not going to just be we're going to start here and we're going to get here. There's going to be some challenges. The Broncos are going to face adversity. There's going to be some times where things look ugly, but can the Broncos, under this new direction, under this new mentality that Sean Payton is trying to instill, when they're in those ugly games, can they find a way to win, which is something they haven't been able to do, right? And I think that, to me, is an important measure I want to see this season. As you mentioned, it's not just going to be 2023. It's how can we get there? How can we take the next step this season for 2024, 2025? And ideally, yes, everybody's goal every single year is to win a Super Bowl. But being realistic, knowing how, hey, 31 other teams are trying to do the same thing, you have to worry about yourself. You have to build that culture from the inside to be able to sustain whatever the outside elements that are attacking whatever you're trying to do, try to, throw a wrench into things. So for me, I think that's something I'm very excited to see work out here for the Broncos. Can it happen here in 2023? Anything is possible. But what is the third reason why we think Sean Payton can be an element that can transform the Broncos back into a winning football team here in 2023? Well, there's something to say about someone who has nothing to prove. We'll dive deeper into that in today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Real quick, make sure you go check out the Locked On Nuggets podcast as the NFL draft is approaching. The Nuggets have made some trade moves in the draft room in terms of capital to put themselves in a position with 3 picks in the first 2 rounds of the 2023 NBA draft. Make sure you check out the Locked On Nuggets podcast, also the Locked On NBA podcast for the draft special. You get that here, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. There's a saying in the world, Sayre, when we look at, players or coaches or just anybody who's backed into a corner, right? They become dangerous. But Sayre, I tend to disagree. I think that you put someone in a corner, yes, they're going to fight. But what about someone who's already been there? What about someone who's already done the damn thing? And for Sean Payton, I look at that as, I feel like there's nothing more dangerous than somebody who has nothing to prove. Sean Payton has done it. He's walked the walk. He's talked the talk. He's done everything throughout his coaching career for all the reasons we've listed in segment 1, in segment 2 to now. Sean Payton is an X factor here for this Broncos team. And more importantly, to really kind of finalize today's episode of the show, he has nothing to prove, which I think is a great thing here for the Broncos.
It really is, because he's been, like you said, to the mountaintop. And he even mentioned that at OTAs, really talking about just this, like, hey, I've been there. And it's kind of like you go to a great restaurant or whatever. He used a couple different analogies, but like you go to a great restaurant, what do you want to do? You want to tell the people that you know about it so that they can go experience it as well. And of course, he said, then you multiply that by as much as you can possibly think, because when you win the Super Bowl in the NFL, it's obviously a little bit better than finding a nice restaurant in your local area or whatever. So he wants to share that feeling with all these players and coaches that may never have experienced that before. And I think that's exactly one of the reasons why he came back, because it's been a while, Cody, since they won that Super Bowl. That was 2010, in February 2010, when they won the Super Bowl. So it's been 13 years since he's been there, and he's been so close a couple of times, hasn't he, to getting back to the game at least. And it's been tough sledding for them. He had a lot of bad luck there in New Orleans, some bad penalty calls.
The Minneapolis Miracle.
In Minneapolis, yeah. I mean, a couple times against the Vikings getting burned there. So he's had some tough luck, but he's a competitor at the end of the day. And I think you see a competitor like this come back. He could be the first coach in NFL history to win a Super Bowl with 2 franchises, right? The first head coach in NFL history. So, hey, they say that's impossible, but they said that was impossible when Peyton Manning joined the Denver Broncos, right? And no quarterback had ever won a Super Bowl with multiple franchises as the starter. And then Peyton Manning went and did that as a member of the Colts and Denver Broncos. So I'm just saying, hey, Sean Payton, he could be thinking of those things in the back of his mind. Like you said, he has nothing to prove to anybody. He has an opportunity to cement his legacy, though, as a Hall of Fame head coach, which I really think he already has, but he could even further maybe get to that first ballot status.
Well, earlier in the show, you did say, like, hey, the Sean Payton signing is just as big. It's like Peyton Manning 2.0, right? And you mentioned Peyton winning a Super Bowl with the Broncos. Okay, hey, he's won it with 2 teams. Now, can the same kind of effect happen here with Sean Payton as a head coach? Won it with New Orleans. Can he win it now as a Denver Bronco? There's a timeline involved there, but you mentioned as well, how long it has been, 2010, right? Gosh, feels like forever. I mean, I was still in high school. I believe in 2010, I was a junior in high school when all that stuff had happened. So for me, it just goes to show, and you mentioned how close he's been. It just shows you how hard it is to win in the NFL, right? And look, there were some times where Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, they would go back to back. They were always in the conversation. New Orleans was always in the conversation on the NFC side of things when Sean Payton and Drew Brees took over there, but it's so hard to do it. And I think it kind of puts things into perspective a little bit of just about how complex the game of football is, right? 11 on 11, and you could have 10 guys. Once again, we'll go back to the Minneapolis Miracle. You can have 10 guys doing the right thing. Takes one guy messing up or whiffing on what should have been a tackle, and then, Stephon Diggs touchdown and throwing the helmet in the air, and it's like, what the heck happened? And that led to Case Keenum signing with the Broncos the next year. I always look back at all this. I'm always wondering, okay, how does everything tie together here for the Broncos, right? All these little storylines. But ultimately, Sean Payton, like you mentioned, has nothing to prove, will come into the situation. And I think he's really embraced taking the mantle as the head coach and saying, hey, like, this is how we got to do it. If we want to win, guys, we got to do this. You got to follow my lead. And that's been the vibe overall at Broncos mini camp. You talk to veterans like Kareem Jackson, who's been around 4 different head coaches in his career. He said, it's nothing like anything I've ever been around. Justin Simmons has talked about just how intricate the details are. Cortland Sutton has talked about, hey, this is different. I've never been around someone who's so focused on this. And I think that the whole football situational awareness, all the situations they're practicing, it makes sense. You want guys to understand the game at a deeper level than maybe they know it outside of going and producing at their position. That makes you, if you're a smarter football team, it gives you an advantage over maybe some other teams that have maybe some better talent at certain positions than you do. That's the thing I think that Sean Payton really does bring to the table here. And Sayre, I'm excited to see how it all pans out. I know Broncos Country is eager as well to see if the Broncos can win here in 2023 in Sean Payton's first year, but setting some realistic expectations. It may not look pretty all the time. It may even take a year for the Broncos to get to where they truly want to be under Sean Payton. But if we see progress from this team carrying forward and it's leading to more wins, I think that the Broncos will be heading in a good direction. I felt very optimistic about the direction they're already heading with Payton from what I've observed. Can that vibe continue? Can you continue to, ascend forward during training camp and the preseason? It's not about, look, if Denver loses 20-0 in a preseason game, that has no indication as to what's going to happen in the regular season. So I think we have to put that into perspective as well. The preseason is a measuring tool for your talent and your depth, and making sure you have some guys that are maybe fulfilling some roles, or maybe establishing a role for themselves in the regular season. Sean Payton is the ultimate X factor here for the Broncos this season, as we talked about, not just turning Russell Wilson around, but can he turn the Denver Broncos around? Broncos Country, let us know your thoughts. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, you can always tweet us your thoughts at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. Let us know what you thought of today's episode. Show in the comment section down below. Make sure you like it, comment for the algorithm, and more importantly, Broncos Country, stay tuned here. Locked On Broncos, because we'll lead you up to training camp with position previews. But we'll talk about things nobody else is talking about. In a time where people are trying to find things to talk about, we have you covered here. Locked On Broncos every single day, all year long. No joke. This is the place to be. Thank you so much for rocking with us, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Tomorrow's episode of the show, for all you everydayers out there, here's what you can look forward to here on the podcast. We're going to take a look at which Broncos rookies do we expect will have the biggest impact. Who could be an under-the-radar type of player as well? We'll dive deeper to that on tomorrow's episode of the show. We'll see you then.